You are listening to Words Off the Street, a discussion with police, fire, and EMS writers. We bring you their take on your world. Stay tuned for your host, BJ Schneider.
You are listening to Episode 5.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Words Off the Street. Today we'll be holding our roundtable. The discussion of topic today is going to be writing as a means of catharsis. With me today will be Sam Bradley, a regular co-host. She is a noted author and podcaster, as well as Kevin Ryder, who is a wilderness medicine expert. It'll be great to have both of them on, and we can see where we lie with some different information. Remember, you can always find the show notes for this show at wordsoffthestreet.com, and please feel free to contact us with questions, ideas, or thoughts at streetwordspodcast@gmail.com. Today's show is brought to you by Xephos Books, Training and Public Speaking. Xephos Books is responsible for my short story collection, Welcome to New Orleans, How Many Shots Did You Hear? And Volume 2, Welcome to New Orleans, The Life You Save May Take Your Own. These collections are true stories from my years as a cop and a medic in the Big Easy. Xepho is also the publisher of my adventure fiction, A Salty Life and a Trader's Death. This is a tale of a modern-day smuggler and pirate caught in the middle of a fight for gold on the high seas. These books can be found on my website at zephosbooks.net, as well as all your favorite ebook outlets. Xephos Book also does trainings in areas such as tactical medicine, safety, and arranges for public speaking at your function. So go to www.zephosbooks, that's Xiphoos books.net, sign up for our newsletter, or visit the Facebook page and follow and get the latest news and releases. Hello and welcome to our first roundtable. In this episode, our panel of people from public safety, including areas such as training, bloggers, podcasters, and of course authors, will touch in on several topics that we find compelling and pass it around looking for better insight into them. We hope to entertain you as well as give you some things to think about. First thing I'd like to do is give introduction to our panel members. I'd like to welcome Sam Bradley. She's a regular co-host here. You'll recognize Sam from episode 1 where I interviewed her, as well as her regular time on her podcast, the Disaster Podcast. Give us a quick and dirty on your public safety and writing background, Sam.
Hey, after 30-something years in EMS, that's kind of hard to do. But basically, EMT, paramedic, educator, worked in an ER for a while, so a variety of experience there. I write a lot of nonfiction stuff, mostly from EMS for EMS publishers. And I've been working on it started out as a trilogy, but it looks like it's going to be longer, called the Odyssey of the Phoenix series, 2 of which are up on Amazon, and the other one will be up, hopefully, sometime next week.
Let's also welcome Kevin. Kevin is a medic, a wilderness medicine instructor, as well as a regular guest host on the Disaster Podcast. Your turn, Kevin. Brag about yourself.
Hi, my name is Kevin. I'm relocated to Texas after growing up in New Jersey. I did a number of years as a firefighter, EMT, search and rescue. I've taught search and rescue. I've done a whole bunch of stuff. And here I am on yet another podcast.
Kevin, I just wanted to let you know when you said, hello, my name is Kevin, I was waiting for you to say, I'm a podcaster, and I've been clean and sober for 3 weeks. So
4 weeks, actually.
But no, excellent. First, thanks for Sam and Kevin coming on. This ought to be fun. This is our first one. We'll see how all this goes. Today, we're going to go into a specific topic that we've all decided was more important than the entire list that I had originally thrown out. It seemed like such a good one. We're going to jump it right up to the front. We're going to talk about writing as a means of catharsis. So many people we talk to on this podcast are public safety people, police, fire, rescue, EMS, in any of those shapes and forms. And a lot of their writing is coming out as a way to deal with some of their personal tragedies, the things they've seen, the things they've done, the gallows humor. And it just seemed like this would be a great thing for us to discuss because we've all worked in and around different aspects of that, and we can kind of put a little insight into that in our personal life and in our professional life. First thing I wanted to do is start off with a couple of quotes here. They seem appropriate for this. The first one, I'll throw it as a quote for the police. The time has come for professional jurors. It's a quote directly from Joseph Wambaugh. Anybody who's worked as a cop for any length of time knows the pain of going through long periods of time dealing with stuff only to have the person not smart enough to get out of jury duty to be the one to make those decisions. The next one I'm going to throw out is a quote for medics. Exercise, I get it on the golf course. When I see my friends collapse, I run for the paramedics. Red Skelton. That is an early form of gallows humor that I can definitely get into. And I guess the one I'll put out here last is a general one. It's when the public says, oh, shit, we say, let's do this. And I think that goes for all the public safety groups, that's kind of how it goes. When you do this job, you always seem to be the one running towards the gunfire and the explosions and the blood instead of away like you should be.
That says a little bit about our mental health, doesn't it?
I think that surely does. And that kind of opens the table up for exactly what we're talking about. I mean, here we are, people who hopefully were smart enough at one point in time to know that if people shoot, you're supposed to go away. And we've always found ourselves going into the fray, whether it be gunshots, like we say, or, oh, look, a forest fire. And instead of going away, we go to it. Not the brightest thing for sure. You could call us heroic. You can call us a lot of things, but smart probably wouldn't be at the top of that list.
But somebody's got to do it.
That is true. That is definitely part of it.
What if nobody put those fires out? What if nobody ran after the bad guy? I mean,
And there's not a lot of thought. You wind up thinking about it well after you're already halfway there, thinking, what am I doing? Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm going to put this fire out or engage this shooter or stop the bleeding or whatever, because it's who we are.
That's a good point, Kevin. I mean, a lot of this is not a decision based on a lot of thought process that you're putting in. You have a lot of training that you've had, your emotional makeup in general. We're helpers, we're fixers. That's what we are in our makeup. That's why we do the silly jobs that we do lots of times. Mm-hmm. And we find ourselves reverting to our training and moving forward, I think, and then kind of getting 3 steps into the burning building going, oh, holy shit, what am I doing here?
I want to throw something out to you guys because I think it was really interesting. I don't know, 2 years ago or so, I took a 2-day police-specific training. And this was back when the police were just taking a whole lot of badgering about shooting the wrong guys and this, that, and the other thing. But the training was about, and you guys maybe can relate to what I'm saying, when someone is faced with, and this is relating to cops, but it could be medics or anybody else, with a sudden, immediate something like a gun in your face that you weren't expecting, your brain goes into a 4-second freeze. And he showed us video after video of this exact thing happening. And in that 4 seconds, a lot of bad things can happen. But the point of that was, and you guys were just talking about it, how training kicks in and it becomes an automatic response. People that were trained better to react to that kind of thing broke that 4 second and did it faster. So I thought that was kind of fascinating because you guys are talking about how our brains work and the fact that training can save your life if it becomes an automatic response and you don't really have to think about it.
I kind of liken it to muscle memory. Way back, I started martial arts training when I was about 6, and I went on for about 30 years in various different styles and forms and whatnot. And the one thing that I learned really early on is the more you practice a set of movements or a single move, your body learns and remembers, and it becomes true muscle memory. And you wind up, if someone goes to punch you in the face, you don't think about it. Your body just kicks in and does what it is knows to do to protect itself. And again, this is relating to martial arts. You'll wind up stepping out of the way.
I think that goes to everything.
Right. But that's kind of how I relate to it is you train and you practice, regardless of what it is that you're training and you're practicing for. So when the real thing does happen, your brain doesn't need to stop and process what's going on and think about the next move. It reacts based on your training. That's why a lot of it is you train like you fight like you train.
It's just like medic skills. I mean, there could be a long period of time between, when I started an IV or not, but I could do that because it's part of my muscle memory. It's a part of my skill set. It doesn't just all go away. You might be a little rusty at it, but it doesn't go away.
Right. I agree. And that is all that we're talking about on the front end. To me, that's what allows us to do the jobs that we do. We go into these situations and do this job, and that training, that muscle memory, that camaraderie that we share with the people we work with allows us to do that job. Now, one of the things that we're talking about with this podcast is what happens on the back side. What happens on the back end when the call is finished and we have to deal with those emotional feelings that come with it, the angst, the anguish, the recrimination sometimes, and dealing with those, and how a lot of people have taken putting pen to paper and using that as a way to get those thoughts out and to deal with it, whether they be just for themselves or, luckily for us, a lot of people have shared them at large, and I think it helps a broader audience.
Yeah, I agree. And for someone that's dealt with critical incident stress management almost since the beginning of my career, that's a very serious subject. And writing may not work for everybody. Everybody has a different means of coping. Everybody has a different means of diffusing things. But for those of us it does work for, and I think that's when I really started writing. I was just writing a journal of some of my experiences, because what you guys do, BJ, for you it's on the medic side or the cop side, is you get back in the car and you talk to your partner and you kind of review the thing and go, hey, did we do everything we could do, and yada, 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 and you kind of review the whole thing. So some of us do that on paper, and that's kind of what I was doing in terms of just looking at each issue. And then later on I'm going, these are some really interesting calls, like this guy's stuck in a water tower. That would translate really well into a book. And so gradually I got incorporated into characters, as did a lot of the people I know, and it worked itself into being a novel. But, some of that stuff's still in there.
Yeah, there's no doubt that that's a big part of what we feel and what we do individually. I mean, I can say that I tried to write some of my stories down for years and never really could get them out. And if anything, when I started making the list and writing the stories that were in my first book, Welcome to New Orleans, I noticed one thing right off the bat. I was about 30 stories into the first 100 stories and went, I haven't wrote a tough story yet. I've written a lot of funny, goofy, and silly stories, but I haven't really written one that grabbed at me. And I realized I was hiding from those stories as much as I was in my own memory, that the ones that were painful, I kept pushing off and pushing off. And those really turned into a sit down with a glass of vodka and start typing and work through those as best I could. And I think they really evolved themselves as we went. They really caused me to re-examine my own feelings and my own thoughts.
How did you feel when you were done, BJ?
Oh, it was like running a marathon. I was exhausted. I was spent, but in a good way. I had taken all that I had taken all those feelings that I had held up for all those years and pent inside me and released them onto the paper. Even if that meant a lot of it didn't make it into the book because there was either more to the story or there was multiple drafts. It gave me a release that was very, very powerful. One of the stories I wrote in the first book called Harold, about a very, very close friend of mine who, Kevin and I'm sure we'll be able to talk about this at length. He died from a heart attack on the job.
Oh.
Vietnam veteran, been around a while. This is in the early 90s. Had denied. Who knew that he had been sneaking nitro for days, and it finally got the best of him. And I wrote the story in two parts. I wrote having to work him and deal with him passing away, and then that last call. And we've all gone to those, and those are some of the toughest things to go through and try to hold it together. There's never a dry eye in the house. And when I first wrote it, I turned around and I gave the story to my wife, who was also there at the funeral. And I said, read this. So she read the whole thing, and she's like, the first part of the story is great. She says, but I don't think the funeral happened the way you say it is. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, I think you're skimming the surface on it. You're kind of not touching on it. Lo and behold, we were able to get a hold of the actual recordings from dispatch from the day of the last call, and I was able to write that as a transcript, word for word. That's probably, it's really hard to type when you cry all over the keyboard. It's very, very difficult. But I feel it's one of the most powerful stories I've ever been able to put down on paper. And I take no credit for that. That story all comes from people telling me, you really need to write this, and having Harold over my shoulder saying it's good to get it out there, so that because everybody's feeling the same thing.
Well, your wife recognized you weren't digging down, and she knew that you needed to, correct?
Yeah, because it was a tough story, and I really was trying to avoid it as much as possible.
That reminds me of a blog post I wrote years ago. Typically, when I write, I try and I try and use a lot of humor, because that's just my nature to be a humorous fellow, and most people hide behind humor, and I'm no exception. And this was the first article at any length I wrote that had absolutely no humor. It was raw, and like BJ just said, I was crying all over the keyboard. It took me a couple days to finish it, because I couldn't make it through it without getting all choked up and having to stop. And I think that was one of my best pieces I've ever written.
Well, it took me 5 years to be able to write anything down about Ground Zero. I tried and failed, I don't know how many times. And then I was asked to publish it, I think, in an anthology. And that's the only thing that really pushed my butt into gear to finish it. And I had the same experience you guys did. I finally needed to face some of those things that I hadn't wanted to dig down and think about.
But now everything is full of humor, and I like making people laugh anyway, so I try and add as much humor. And it's true humor. The recent post MI posts I wrote on Facebook, if you read them, and I know Sam, you've read them. BJ, I'm not sure if you read them yet.
Most certainly I did.
But I mean,
we've been sharing them.
They were funny. I mean, in real life, it actually was funny as it was happening. I mean, I'm in the ER having an active heart attack, and 3 gorgeous nurses had to shave my chest because they couldn't get the 12 lead stickers to stick to me.
You haven't seen Kevin's chest.
And I'm sitting there.
I'm going to just plead the fifth on this.
I'm in the bed, and they're shaving me, and all I could think of was, and I actually said it. I was like, somebody hand me my phone. And they all kind of looked at me. I was like, are you kidding me? I need to get a selfie of this because no one's going to believe it. And they kind of looked at me. I was like, I got 3 gorgeous ladies shaving my chest. I need a picture of this.
Oh, I have a picture of the guys in the cath lab with their bandanas running around like ninjas. I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh, and then after they got done shaving my chest, they said, oh, I had to stand up and to do something. I forget now what it was. And I have all these wires and cables hanging off of me. And someone said, there's a picture for you. I was like, sure, why not? And that's the one that you see me. I'm standing there with my shirt off with all these leads, and then I got defib pads on me, and I'm like, yep, thumbs up. Here I am.
It took you about 3 days to find them all and pull them up.
A little bit longer than that.
Nothing like finding that EKG pad stuck in a place that it really shouldn't
dude,
be.
I found tape.
How did that get there?
Tape on my back. It was like, what? Tape. Just tape.
That was for some smart-ass comment you made. That's what that was for. You don't know it, but they put that there on purpose.
Does that stuff migrate from, one place to the other?
Well, I think the funniest part is the eggplant.
You talk about, we're talking about humor to offset a painful or a difficult situation. And as we're talking about, Kevin just had his first MI. Welcome to the club, Kevin. We appreciate you joining the ranks. I am a multiple stint recipient myself. I've written a story about my MI called Textbook because it felt like I was writing right through the textbook and every one of the topics on it. But one of the things that happened that I really didn't expound on in there, and it's humorous, and it's just the way we have to deal with it, is same thing. I guess it runs in EMS-type mails. I was, of course, hitting on the nurse in the cath lab as they were about to put me under. And the last thing she said was, be no big deal. You'll be up in about 45 minutes. It'll be no problem. You'll be back in your room. And I said, oh, great. 190, and I was gone. And when I opened my eyes again and I looked around and I went, oh, shit, this isn't my room. And then the second thought that ran through my mind was, oh, crap, is this what hell looks like? Then I saw a clock, and it said that 4 hours had passed. And another thought crossed my mind, and I went, oh, this can't be good. I think something has obviously not gone the way we expected it.
Well, I'm glad to say I'm not a member of your club, and I hope not to be for a while. But I think, BJ, we need to do a podcast on how EMS eats your heart, because it seems like there's a growing, there seems to be a growing number of guys. BJ, you weren't even 50 yet, were you, when you had yours? You were pretty young, and Kevin too.
I had my first one at 46.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That, what? Really?
I mean, it's a perfect example that how many nights have you eaten on the dashboard of a truck, running call after call, then stayed up to drink beer the next morning, or did multiple shifts back to back? And of course, we're Superman when we do it, and we don't think about the long-term effects. And you're right. That's the kind of podcast we have to talk about, because what Kevin and I just went through is a perfect example of what happens 10 years down the line after you've treated your body like an amusement park instead of a cathedral. So that's exactly what happens.
Well, and there's a lot of studies realistically about, waking up out of a dead sleep to an alarm and having that heart rate go from 0 to 90 immediately, again and again and again over years and years and years. That takes a toll. When you're 22, you're not thinking about that. But you guys are good evidence of that.
What are you saying? That we're old?
Well,
Sam, what are you saying?
I think I got you. Hey, look at that. Sam was silent. I don't think that's ever happened before.
I was trying to be nice. I could have said something else. But
let's steer this back to what we were talking about. We were talking about writing for catharsis, and it has obviously helped all three of us in one way or another. The way we're writing. The next part of this I want to talk about is, how do we feel this helps others when we take our stories, whether they be stories that are now fictitious for novel's sake, whether they be blog posts, whether they be anything, and put them out to others? What do we feel we're doing with that? How are they helping us? How is that helping them? Let's talk about that.
I think the biggest thing is people realize, hey, it's not just me feeling like this.
Absolutely. And I'll be honest, when my first book went out, my books aren't plot-based, they're character-based. And I want people, there's two sides to this. There's people in the industry, like Kevin just said, that can relate to what we're talking about because they've been there. They know that somebody that's been there. And then there's the public that may see, and I'm a member of a romance writers group, so...
Yeah, no, we've read your books. They come with...
it's to assuage that romance. The reality is, I want people to understand what they go through, what it's like when you shoot somebody for the first time, what it's like when you lose your first patient, all of those kinds of things, because that's just like we're talking, just the situations we've been talking about that we've experienced. I want people to know what they go through and how they resolve it. And I was so pleased that after my first book came out, the first review I got from somebody I actually didn't know on Amazon said, wow, I didn't even finish the book yet, but I had to write this review to say she nailed the PTSD part. So I'm thinking to myself, this is somebody that's probably experienced that, or at least knows about it. So that told me I met my objective. Somebody understood or could relate to as a provider what my character was going through. That's important to me.
You're dead on with that.
I think it's important to all of us.
Yeah.
It's almost like a confirmation.
True, so true. I had the pleasure to interview Kevin Hazard a few weeks ago. I don't know if any of y'all know Kevin. Kevin's got a book out called 1,000 Naked Strangers. It's a story of his time in EMS. And currently he's working as one of the writers on the CBS TV series Code Black. So he's definitely got some insight. I'm going to share the opening prologue in his book with y'all right now. Now, I've been a medic 25 plus years. All of us have been in this for a long time. When I read this, it touched me saying, wow, this is really something that he was able to get down on paper for what happens with a new medic. It says, prologue. I did nothing to save the first person who died in front of me. I simply stood watch and let her go. She was old and white and wasting away in a nursing home. Her death was unceremonious but fast, and I was the only witness Earth's final sentry, there to do nothing but close the gates as she slipped through. And I read that and I went, damn.
Wow.
What a great way to sum it up about those feelings of thinking about being a new medic, standing there with someone dying in front of you for the first time, and the emotions that you were filled with, and knowing there was nothing you could do. I think he did a great job of putting it down. And when you can turn around and touch someone who's been in it a long time, how does this have to affect a new medic or a civilian who has family who are doing these public safety jobs? When they read this, how do they feel when they read this? And I hope it touches them the same way it touches me.
I don't know if you've heard of Ginger Locke, but she runs a new podcast called Medic Mindset, and she interviews a lot of new medics, new being within their first 1 to 3 or 4 years as a medic. And one of her questions is always about books, and that book pops up every single time. She asked them, have you read this book? Here's a copy. You need to read this book.
I just wish it was my book, they would say more often. But,
I'll get on the phone after this, and I'll call her and say, hey, here's $5 every time you plug his book. Here you go.
I've had the great pleasure to step up in front of different classes in the past couple of years, and we talk about using what you've got to help others, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. What I've had the pleasure of doing is I go back every year for the new paramedic class, and when they do cardiology, since I had my first heart attack, I get up there and give the paramedic's point of view of having his heart attack. So I kind of get to do it from both sides. I get to say, this is what it was like to have a heart attack, but let's talk about it from the pathophysiology side of things and the emotional side of things. And it makes a great long lecture to do with them, because you'll never have them more engaged than to sit there and hear about you having your heart attack and being able to talk about it in technical terms. It goes very, very well. And then I've also had the pleasure of getting up there with all those old grizzled medics that we all know who have to sit in that horrible refresher class every 2 years. And I've been asked to come in and say, please keep these demons down in their seat. Can you come tell stories for a couple of hours? Well, asking me to stand up in front of class and tell stories, you might as well just feed me sugar. That's the best thing I could do. And it's great because it fuels me up to be able to see people getting excited and all that, and to say, hey, I remember this. Tell us about that, or tell us about this. And I think it's good for everybody.
Yeah, I do fire academies, and it's the same kind of thing. You look at all these new faces in uniform that look like they're all 12 years old, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, my God, have you got some experiences to go through? So I agree with you, BJ. I think sharing some of your own experiences, and they can sit there and say, another old person talking about the 5 miles in the snow story. But others of them really do relate and gives them some insight. I think it is valuable.
And I will be writing an article about what I went through and experienced, and I'm hoping it's going to be written for both the layperson and the provider, because I use my experience as a provider. Basically, the long story short is I knew something was going on. I wasn't sure what it was because I never had a heart attack before, and I didn't have the classic symptoms. And I remember telling myself, as long as I don't get diaphoretic, it can't be that bad. And then I'm standing at my desk and I'm telling my coworker, I don't feel so good. You might want to get ready to call 911. And then I lost all strength and I hit the floor. And he came running over and said, are you okay? And as he said that, I noticed I was about as diaphoretic as SpongeBob. And I said, no, call 911. And it was at that point I realized, oh, shit, this is not good. But I remember thinking, you know what? There's no sense of getting excited. There's no sense. I'm not going to panic. I'm going to stay calm. He's calling 911. And then, okay, I can hear the sirens. They're 3 blocks away. I'm good. I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. They're going to get me. They're going to bring me to the hospital, and they're going to do what needs doing. And at no point did I get upset. I wasn't anxious. I kept my blood pressure a little bit too low. I think my pulse was like 38. So I was, compensating a little bit too much. But the whole time, and even in the ambulance, they're like, hey, we're going to give you some aspirin. I was like, yep, I know. Chew them, don't swallow them. Oh, you know that. Yep. Okay, we're going to give you, under the tongue. Don't chew it. I got it. Like, you've done this before. It's like, no, but I've been on your side plenty of times. And it turns out that one of the medics that was there, I know, I just didn't realize it was him because I was a little bit distracted at the time. But it was, in a way, it was kind of cool because having the training as a provider and having been through that with a patient and making sure to keep them calm, to keep them relaxed, don't get excited, don't panic. I was doing that to myself, which in the end helped me.
Well, there's another topic we could add on to our MI podcast, although I think we're having it, is paramedic denial. Seriously, I mean, when you listen to Kevin, he kind of knew before he admitted that he knew.
Yeah.
Because when you're 48 years old, you're not thinking, okay, it's time for me to have the big one. I'm too young for that. But that seems to be more and more common, especially in our circles. And I don't know your experience as much, BJ, but you were talking about your guy who was eating nitro like candy. He was clearly in denial. And because of that, he didn't get help in time. But he could have. And I know that's something that's making you crazy, is if he had just listened to himself, if he had listened to the signs and symptoms that he knew so well, he could be alive today. But denial is such a common thing because we're the rescuers. So we can't get sick.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm no better. You can read in my story. I'm all the classic textbook signs, and my wife finally stood there, and she held her cell phone in one hand and her keys in the other hand, and she said, in the car or in the ambulance, that's your only choices. You pick one of those two, because I was like, no, I'm going to be okay. Just give me a minute. And I got one or the other. No other choices are allowed here. But I mean, I think being able to get in front of these classes and talk to these guys, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of the old deal. If I get across to one of them, if I make any difference to one of them to help steer how they set their careers just a little bit, instead of being the guy who says, don't do this, you'll never make any money, you'll just bust your back. Instead of being that guy saying, it's a wonderful career, there's a lot of specialties, but plan ahead. I'm hoping that that's the kind of thing that I can do through my writing.
BJ, the biggest thing you do is you're teaching them empathy. You're teaching them the perspective. They can't,
I didn't think you were that old.
They cannot relate to an 80-year-old.
No, I meant BJ.
Not in this world. Shut up.
I put my teeth in there. It's all fine.
Okay, clarify yourself. But I'm serious. They can't relate to someone who's going through the life experience of someone that age, and they can't relate to their vision of an MI is what they read in a textbook. But when you come and tell them about your experience as you stand in front of them, then it becomes real because they're looking at you. And you had one and you survived and this is what you went through. So I think there's just not a good way to teach empathy. They just have to get in the field and learn it. But I think
it's empathy and compassion. I mean, they run hand in hand. I mean, you can have all the compassion in the world, but if you don't have any empathy, in my personal opinion, you have a lot of room to grow as a provider, whether that be a medic or, a police officer or whatever. But once you get compassion and empathy, I mean, skills are a part of it, but those two, I think, are the top two. And people will remember you for it. They won't remember how, hey, he got me on the first IV stick, cool. No, that was the guy that held my mother's hand the entire way to the hospital and cried with her because he knew he couldn't do anything. That's what you're going to get remembered for, and you're going to get remembered as a great person as well as a great provider.
And handsome, too. Let's not forget handsome.
I don't want to be, conceited, But, they're going to remember you for the way you treat people, not so much the skills that you have, because they're not going to know if you're the best IV sticker in the world or the worst. They don't know that. But they do know, hey, you showed compassion and empathy for my loved one, and they're going to remember you for that.
That couldn't be more true. When I was an ambulance company supervisor, I knew the kind of reports I'd get back out. We had one old grizzled medic that had the worst bedside manner on the planet, but he has the best skills technician we had. But he was the one that always got the complaints because he was just grumpy. And yet you get another guy who would, stick a person 7 times, but he was nice to them. You never heard complaints about that guy. So I totally agree with what you're saying. So, BJ, we're talking about catharsis. And for those that don't know what we're talking about, it's just your ability to diffuse yourself. And like we said earlier, people have different ways of doing that. But for those of us, all of us in this room at the moment, writing is a means to an end. And, I was fascinated with what you were saying, BJ, and your inability, as Kevin and I both experienced, and when you can't write it down, you're not done with it. So you need to do whatever you need to do to get done with it. And maybe that is the process of writing it down, even if it takes you years like it did us. But once you do it, and I envision both of you guys crying over your keyboard, big buff dudes sitting there crying over their keyboard. But you needed to do that. You needed to get to that point. And that's the catharsis we're talking about that you guys express through writing eventually. So again, it's not going to work for everybody, but for those that are working through something, just write stuff down. Just sit down and do a daily journal. Do a daily journal of what you're feeling. And that will help you work through the process.
Some final thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, don't try and write everything down. Try and write because you're going to remember it. And from my own experience, I've written just the basics. And then when you read, what you wrote, it'll all come flooding back. All the little details. And I'm sure, BJ, you're the same way. You write the main things that happened. And then when you go back and read them later, the details will just magically appear.
I think that's a very good way of putting it. Well, I guess for my final words, I hope that we can get a lot of great writers on here who have been policemen, firemen, medics, other public service personnel on the show, and that you get a chance to see their work and read some of the things that they've written, whether it be fiction, nonfiction, or blogs, and build that empathy that we've talked about to the job that they've done over the years. So many times the rescuers spend so much time taking care of others that they forget to take care of themselves. And that if we can gain a better insight into the public safety personnel, I think we can be a more compassionate people as a whole towards those who help us. I think that was very informative and a whole lot of fun. I want to definitely thank Sam and Kevin for spending time with us here at Words Off the Street. As always, we have a good time. Hopefully we entertain and educate a few folks. If you have something you think we should discuss, a guest you'd like us to have on, or a question you want us to ask, email us at streetwordspodcast@gmail.com. Let's take a minute and, Sam, tell us about where we can find you, your books, and your podcast. Tell us a little about that.
Well, social media, you find me under Sam Bradley or Sam Bradley 11. Come to thedisasterpodcast.com if you want to see what we're talking about over there. We have a lot of great topics. As well, we have a Facebook page on that. Just search Disaster Podcast. And my books are all on Amazon. Just look for Partners, Odyssey of the Phoenix, or just Partners, and they'll usually pull you in there. And soon I will have my writer's website up, but it's not quite ready. So you can put that up there, BJ, when I get it functional.
Kevin, what about you? Where can we find you? Where can people contact you and get information on wilderness medicine and the other aspects of things that you're doing?
Well, you can find me on the web at wildsafety.com, and I have links to all of my social media sites right off the main website. You can email me at training@wildsafety.com. I will be beginning work on my hopefully first book soon, and once I have that going, I'll maybe we can do an update, and I'll let you all know where that's going to be.
Definitely. And whenever you're finished and ready to go out with your writings about your events since the heart attack, we definitely want to get on and do a one-on-one with that. And I'd be happy to put that up on the website for Words Off the Street as well. I think that would be a great addition to what we're doing.
Awesome. I hope to be finished with the first initial draft by the end of this week. And then we have the holiday weekend coming up, so I'll be putting the finishing touches on it over the weekend.
Excellent. Well, folks, all things we discussed today, including links to Sam and Kevin, can be found in our show notes at www.wordsoffthestreet.com. Thank all of you for listening. I'm sitting here with my son, Blade. Say hi, Blade.
Hi.
Remember, you can always find the show at wordsoffthestreet.com. You can find us at Facebook at Words Off the Street. And you can always send us an email at streetwordspodcast@gmail.com.
Bye. See you next time.
You heard him. See you next time, folks.